Well, it's my pleasure today to rise to respond to Her Honor Lieutenant Governor Lois Mitchell's gracious reading of the speech from the throne. That speech, Mr. Speaker, began by recognizing that we are a diverse province. But in our diversity, we share common values, those of compassion, hard work, and justice. And that we, at our best, are an open and inclusive society. One province, one people, on a common journey towards a common future. I say at our best, Mr. Speaker, because admittedly that's an ideal we haven't always risen to. I think back to the famous five who had to fight for women in our province to have the right to vote and eventually be elected to this House. I think back to the First Nations who walked this land before us, where we stand today on Treaty 6 territory, and after signing those treaties by whose grace we stand here today, were corralled onto reserves, their children forced into residential schools, and their voices not fully heard in our democratic process until 1960. I think of the many immigrants who came here to build better lives and found themselves confronted with prejudice. Like the Alberta senior I spoke with at the recent celebrations for Black History Month, a son of the original exodusters, who told me that his first language was Ukrainian due to the close ties forged between his family and local Ukrainian families as they both faced discrimination. I think of the Klein cuts of the 1990s, when thousands of Albertans, doctors, teachers, nurses, child service workers, were thrown out of work, tuition spiked, and Albertans suffering with addictions and mental illness were turned out into the street. And I think of the debate in this very chamber, where members of this House stood to argue that vulnerable LGBTQ+ youth should have to go to court to earn the right to form a peer support group in their school. Mr. Speaker, I dare say those were moments that did not make life better for many Albertans and their families. However, there are times when we live up to our ideals. As Her Honor read in the speech from the throne last year, Albertans came together in a time of extraordinary danger. As the wood buffalo wildfires tore through communities, we stood as one, as fellow citizens with a shared responsibility to each other. And indeed, I'm encouraged to think of the thousands of Albertans who donated time, money, and goods to support the residents of Wood Buffalo. I think of the thousands of Albertans who rose up to demand that the government of Alberta amend Bill 10 to provide true support for LGBTQ+ students in our schools. I think of the 400 people who attended our legislature's first official recognition of Black History Month, the dozens of articles and stories I saw in our local media celebrating the stories and contributions of Albertans of African descent. And I remember standing here in this legislature shortly after our election when our Premier, on behalf of the government of Alberta, apologized to the First Nations people for the injustices visited on them through the residential school system. And I think of the thousands of Albertans who formed community organizations, social agencies, volunteered their time to triage the damage that was wreaked by short-sighted cuts in the funding of our systems of community support and mental health. Organizations that have become such important partners to government in delivering street-level services in addressing issues of substance use and homelessness. Mr. Speaker, Alberta is at its best when we work together, when we stand together, and when we are committed to government that includes and looks out for all Albertans. A government that, when faced with a crisis, doesn't abandon its responsibility to protect and maintain the core services Albertans rely on. A government committed to making their lives better. Mr. Speaker, we're well aware of the impact the historic drop in the price of oil has had on families in our province. And since our election, we've been working to help protect them through this economic downturn and make their lives better. We've maintained stable, predictable funding for healthcare and education, protecting key services and vital jobs that support everyday Alberta families. And while we've instituted a freeze on salaries for cabinet ministers, MLAs, political staff, and management in the civil service, we have not resorted to the sorts of sweeping layoffs that devastated Edmonton's economy in the 1990s, affecting many families in my constituency of Edmonton Centre. Mr. Speaker, we're well aware of the integral role that the energy industry plays in our economy, and the need to ensure that it can continue and be a sustainable source of good jobs and prosperity in a carbon-constrained future. And that's why we work with industry, First Nations, and environmental groups to develop the Climate Leadership Plan, a plan that will put our province at the forefront of innovation in clean energy and sustainable resource extraction, while protecting the environment and all those who depend on it. A plan that secured the approval of a new pipeline to the West Coast, a pipeline that will help ensure that we get the best value for our product, supporting good mortgage-paying jobs in our province. A plan that will create even more in the development of a robust renewable energy industry and support communities as we transition away from coal-fired power generation. A plan that supports Alberta families in reducing their energy use. A plan in which all Albertans work together to build a stronger, more sustainable economy for our future. And of course, our modernized royalty framework also provides new incentives, helping to reduce costs and improve efficiencies, and has led directly to an increase in drilling activity and the jobs that provides. I was happy in the last session of the legislature to have the opportunity to co-sponsor legislation to establish the Alberta Investor and Capital Infrastructure Tax Credits, programs that will help attract investment to grow our growing startup and technology industries, many of which get their start at Startup Edmonton and Tech Edmonton right here in Edmonton Centre. Industries that help diversify our economy and provide good opportunities for young Alberta families. And our increased investments in infrastructure are also supporting good jobs in construction, while maintaining and increasing our stock of much-needed hospitals and schools. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we're looking out for those who need an extra hand. I have the honour of representing our government as a member of the Stewardship Roundtable for End Poverty Edmonton. And in discussions and recent reports, EPE noted that the new Alberta tax credit and increase in minimum wage are important steps towards lifting hundreds of families in our city out of poverty and giving them the opportunity to truly thrive in their communities. These are concrete actions that make life better, not only for those particular families, but for all Albertans, as we work together to build stronger communities and local economies. We're investing over $1 billion to upgrade and increase our stock of affordable housing, and will shortly be releasing Alberta's first affordable housing strategy, a plan to ensure that all Alberta families can afford a dignified place to live. And Mr. Speaker, we're investing in many other areas to support those in need. I spoke at length yesterday about how proud I am to see our government's commitment to implement principles of harm reduction. As stated clearly in the speech from the throne, we will move forward with supervised consumption services and other harm reduction measures to address the rising tragedy of opioid overdose deaths. I was very happy to hear several members of the third party rise and declare that they also support these sites and these principles during our emergency debate yesterday. I look forward to hearing members of our official opposition also voice their support. We've increased funding to FCSS, which funds many important community organizations around our province. And we've increased funding for women's shelters in multiple municipalities. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to making life better for Alberta's families. And every week I see all of my colleagues, these other 53 men and women that I have the honour of serving with, and indeed members of the other parties in this House, out serving their constituents, out working in their communities. Mr. Speaker, I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to events and had opportunities to go out and meet with groups and been told, we've never had an MLA here before. I am so pleased, Mr. Speaker, to see that all members of this House have begun to have a renewed commitment to the people of Alberta. that are spending time on the ground, listening to the people, working with the people who work on the front lines, who know the work that needs to be done. Our government remains committed to working with them, to supporting them, to ensuring that we continue to build the facilities we need, provide the services that are required, and that we are there to support them through this difficult time. A difficult time, Mr. Speaker, that we will come through together. We are united as Albertans. Our government is there to support, to make Alberta's families' lives better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.